Welcome to Our 2 Cents on Your Dollar, the podcast brought to you by Strategic Insights, where we break down the numbers, decode the noise, and offer smart takes on money matters so your financial future makes sense. Hi, everyone. Benjamin Franklin once said, the only thing certain in life is death and taxes. And so today we are excited to invite Tim, co-owner of Rick Brown Family Funeral Home, to talk about death, maybe some taxes, but talk about death, unfortunately.
Yeah, we'll talk a little about death. I don't know about the taxes thing. I think that's more, maybe that's more y'all's department than mine. But, one of the things that I want to talk about since we're here and you guys are financial guys is nobody's ever prepared, And so I think that that's very important. So I hope that we get to some of those subjects today.
Yeah, with that being said, I like to... Okay, how did this come to be, right?
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of times we'll get clients that say, hey, James, I want to put this money aside and it's going to be so my kids can bury me. Mm-hmm. And we'll just put it there. We'll slap a transfer on death beneficiary designation. Mm-hmm. But then I came to realize, well, that requires a death certificate.
Right,
and sometimes that takes a while. So can you talk to that point a little bit?
I'm glad you realize that sometimes financial guys are hard to get through to. So I'm excited, man.
You must be talking about James.
It's James, man. James is a James, right?
That way. That's right.
No, but real honestly, death certificates do take a while. And sometimes in Texas, now the system's a little bit longer. So you're looking at nearly 6 weeks. Well, if that money is tied up somewhere that requires a death certificate for payable on death, you're either borrowing money, you're putting it on a credit card, you're doing a GoFundMe, and you have plenty of money, but you can't get to it. And so it's important that when someone passes away, that money is available. And so that is the big education thing that we have to go through. I understand the whole idea of we're going to put some money away because we want to watch it grow. However, if you can't get to it at the end of life, you've lost all that money having to pay interest on the credit card, or you lost all that money having to, borrow somebody, whether that be a loan shark or something to that effect. And so it's important to pre-plan this and make sure that money is liquid at the time.
Okay. So in order to pre-plan, how much should somebody plan to spend on services?
Well, and so let's talk a little bit about funeral industry, because when you're talking pre-planning, you're talking about just putting money into a fund somewhere. In the funeral industry, when I talk about pre-planning, I'm talking about how does the state of Texas allow funeral homes to pre-plan funerals? And so there's a couple of ways. Some funeral homes, particularly the funeral homes that were in business 50 years ago, they have what's a trust fund, and they'll hold their money there. But very few people do that because they don't want to deal with the Department of Banking. And so normally what happens is we work with insurance companies. And so the insurance company will hold your money until you pass away. Some of the benefits of putting your money into an insurance company is it freezes the cost. The cost can never go up on you. And it's fully transferable. These days, particularly here in the Valley, people don't stay here forever. Their kids move off, and then they say, well, you know what? I'm getting elderly. I can't live here anymore. I'm going to go move close to Johnny, who lives in another city. Well, when they move, this money is transferable. It doesn't sit in the funeral home bank account. Also, if we go out of business, it's still your money. It's with the insurance company. And so that's the idea, is that it freezes the cost. Now, there's a couple of pros and cons to that, and the pro obviously is it's paid off. No one ever has to worry about anything, and the cost is frozen. But the con is, you guys could probably talk a little bit more about this than I can. If they take that money and they invest it somewhere, likely they could make more than inflation. Because that's what they're doing, is when they freeze the cost, they're trying to beat inflation. So likely they can make more than inflation, but if they don't have liquid money, if they don't have something available to pay for that property, to pay for that funeral home or pay for that funeral, then they're kind of in trouble again.
Tim, you mentioned the state of Texas,
right,
and trust fund. Is there some sort of regulation when it comes to funeral homes?
Well, and so I actually sit on the Texas Funeral Service Commission for Governor Abbott. So funeral homes are regulated through the Texas Funeral Service Commission, and it's quite an honor to do that. There's only 3 funeral directors. It's a 7-member panel, and so to be appointed by Governor Abbott's pretty exciting, And so I sit on that commission for Governor Abbott. However, when you're talking about money, the Department of Banking comes and makes sure if you have a trust fund. And so what happened is in the early to mid 1990s, most funeral homes took their trust funds and they sold them to insurance companies. That way the insurance company is now responsible for all that. Nobody really likes to see the banking auditor come in their office and say, oh, you're missing a penny, And we're great at funerals. We're not necessarily the accountant guys. And so very few funeral homes actually have trust funds anymore. The majority of us go through, an insurance policy.
Wow.
Just to back up a little bit, because I think we might be speaking different language.
Okay.
pre-planning is not just sticking money into a fund with us.
Right.
Pre-planning is something else.
So there's a whole industry out there, and they call it pre-need. And so it's pre-planning funerals. And so that is a specific channel through the Texas Department of Insurance that is specific for your funeral goods. And so you have a couple of options. You could just say, here, I'm paying my whole thing up front. I'm going to pay my whole funeral up front. And then that just acts as a holding, avenue, I guess, for your money. So when you pass away, the funeral home is paid. The other option is say, well, I want to make payments. However, if I pass away before the payments are made, I want to go ahead and have it paid in full. Well, there's an insurance premium that goes on that. And so when I talk about pre-planning, prepaying, that's what I'm talking about. Now, when you're talking about pre-planning, it sounds to me like you're talking about, we're going to take this set of money or take this amount of money, we're going to set it aside, and then at the time of death, we'll figure out what to do. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
big difference.
yeah, it's a huge difference. Yeah. And so the benefit of mine is that it freezes the cost, and then no one has to worry about it. The benefit of yours is likely you made more money when it was all said and done. And so, there's no cookie cutter way to do this. And so I think each client has to sit down and say, okay, I've got X number of dollars in the bank. My child is a signer on my bank account. This isn't going to be a problem at all. Take my money, invest it, and make it grow. The flip side of it is, I'm living Social Security. I've got, I don't have the money in the bank should something go bad today. Let me start making payments, freezing the cost of the funeral. That way no one ever has to worry about it.
So pre-needs is essentially an insurance policy that's good at any funeral home in the state of Texas.
No, it's good at any funeral home in the United States. They are transferable. Now, there is a caveat to that, okay? So the caveat is, if you come back to the originating funeral home, you come back to my funeral home, by law, I can never raise the price. What you paid today, kind of like the Texas Tomorrow Fund, you and I were speaking about that earlier. What you pay today is the price you're going to pay. Now, I wish I could go down to the Ford dealer and say, hey, when I retire, I want a brand new truck, but I want to pay today's prices. It doesn't happen like that. But in the funeral industry, you can. However, if you go to a different funeral home, they have the right to say, well, you've paid in X number of dollars, you owe X number of dollars. That's pretty rarely done. And a lot of people, you'll even see in the newspaper, funeral homes that advertise, we honor all prepaid funerals. That's what they mean by that, is that regardless of where you go, we may take a little loss on it.
Even in California.
Yeah. Even in other countries like California.
Oh, there it is.
shouldn't have gone there. But and it doesn't take a rocket scientist figure out, what happens is the insurance company invests that money, they make money on it. And so when you do pass away, the funeral home gets not only the face amount of that insurance, but they get growth on it. And so the growth is keeping up with inflation. And so that's how the backside of that business works. That's why the cost is frozen. And that's also why most funeral homes will say, we'll honor any policy. They know that there's growth on those policies as well.
Okay. So in today's dollars, how much do services typically range?
So that just depends on what you want. That's almost saying how much is a vehicle. I want to go buy a car. Well, how much is a car? And so a lot of it depends on what you're going to be purchasing. If you want to have a traditional funeral, if you want to have, with a burial, if you want to have a cremation, or if you want to have a viewing and then have a cremation, all that kind of is a variable. But the average cost right now in America is about $6,500. But mind you, that's the funeral side of it. What a lot of people don't realize is that there's also a cemetery side. So you still have to buy a cemetery property. And that here in the Valley, it ranges anywhere from about $3,200 to close to $10,000, depending on the cemetery you go. So when you start adding up $6,500 plus $10,000 plus any little things that come up here and there, you're looking at $20,000, and that's just the funeral. That's not including anything else that might need to take place. For instance, I have children that live in Cambodia. They do stuff over there. When I die, I'm not sure, but I'd hope that they'd want to come to my funeral, So that's an expense. Right. But if I'm not prepared for that, well, either they're going to put it on a credit card and they're going to be paying for the next 15 years to come to Dad's funeral, or they're not going to come. Those are the options.
Let's say you have someone that did some pre-planning and they have the funeral side covered. Mm-hmm. What exactly happens if they don't have a cemetery lot? Like, what goes down? So
a couple of options is the family can choose to do cremation and say, well, then we don't need a cemetery property. But, if it's the wishes that they want to be buried, well, then now they have to go and find cemetery property. And real honestly, in the Valley, there's not a whole lot of cemeteries out there. And so your choices are getting narrower and narrower because a lot of these older historic cemeteries that you drive around and see, they're getting full. And so there's nothing to buy there, which is obviously driving the prices up. And so either you can start prepaying your cemetery property as well, or you can make another decision of how we're going to handle the final disposal of the remains.
Pre-needs policies do not cover cemetery plots.
That is correct. However, most cemeteries, they do their own in-house financing, that kind of thing. And there are some pre-need policies for like what's called the opening and closing, the digging of the grave. And a lot of the cemeteries will sell those also. That's an insurance product also. And so, we're here talking, and there's so many things already we're talking about that are expensive at death. And we haven't even gotten to outside of the funeral. And that's one of I think people get sick of hearing me say it, but I'm always like, it's expensive to die. And they think I'm talking about the funeral, but it's not even the funeral. The funeral, we pretty much have a finite bill on this funeral. We know that we're not going to cross X number of dollars, but you start thinking about, well, mom, her house is in horrible shape. We got to get it sold. Well, now it's full of stuff. If she's like my mom, oh, sorry, mom. Anyway, she might be a little bit of a hoarder. There's a lot of stuff in there, but, so you got to get rid of all that. There's, what if there's a vehicle? Either it gets repossessed or I've got to figure something out with it. That costs money. The carpet, man, this shag carpet was great in 72, but now we're not in 72 anymore, And so you start thinking about what it costs to die. It's very expensive. And so if you can eliminate the funeral side from your family, they're not having to worry about that. Mm-hmm. When the death certificate comes in, they can take the money that they've invested with you, and they can take that money and do everything that they need to do to make sure the end of life is handled efficiently for their parents. And, without proper planning, it just doesn't happen like that. One of the saddest things I see is GoFundMe pages. They have their place, but oftentimes it feels like every time someone passes away, we're getting a GoFundMe. And I get it, but with a little bit of planning and a little bit of foresight, you wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah. So what are some planning strategies to take care of funeral expenses and those other ancillary expenses?
Well, and so it involves you and me. We can let James involve in it too. Okay, it involves all three of us.
Maybe.
How's that?
Poquito.
All right, just a little bit. Yeah, so it involves you and me. So they need to come in and they need to work with a funeral home and say, okay, this is what I want. This is how I want to pay for it. And we'll give them plenty of different options. And then come to you and say, okay, when I pass away, my funeral's taken care of, but what about all these other items? Where do I go about that? And that's where y'all come in and say, we can set money aside that would be available with the death certificate to make sure that that money is available to your beneficiary.
When it comes to options, are you talking about lump sum, a payment plan?
Yes, both of those. Yeah, so you can do a lump sum, you can do a payment plan, and then payment plans, you could do two different kinds. One is like $1 for $1. That means that if the funeral, let's just say round numbers, if it's $5,000 and I've paid $2,500, well, my family still owes $2,500. Or you can, with a little bit of an insurance premium, say funeral's $5,000. If I've paid $2,500, I want the whole thing paid in full. Well, that has an insurance premium, and so that's a little more expensive on a monthly basis. However, a lot of times people opt that direction because it takes it out of the hands of their family altogether. One of the things that I think is most important is that people speak to their family. Tell them what they want. Nobody likes to talk about death. It's almost taboo. Nobody wants to talk about death. Oh, I don't want to talk about death. But it's so important. And even if you make these plans, even if they come to my office or they come to your office and they make these plans, they need to talk to their family so their family knows where that money's at. And so often people will come in and they say, I don't have any idea. I don't know what Dad wanted. I don't know if he had any money. I don't have. And so then it's this whole process of going back and forth. Would Dad want to be cremated? Would Dad want to be buried? Does Dad have money to do either? Do I need to go figure out how to do this? And so having that conversation is so important. And on the flip side of that, people will come to me and say, Dad had no plans. And I'll put their name in my computer and say, oh, Dad came in 3 years ago and paid for everything. What? They just, by happenstance, called my funeral home and I had the file.
Wow.
Otherwise, they would have gone to another funeral home. Dad would have lost his money, had gone to the States somewhere over, 50 years later. It's just so important to have those conversations with your family and let them know what you're doing. And as we get older, that's even more important. And you guys can probably speak to that a little bit. I mean, as you're
Like getting older?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I got a little gray hair, but yeah. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, real honestly, you could probably speak to some of your clients are probably elderly and how important it is that their children have somewhat of an idea of who to call when they pass away.
So, Tim, going back to the payment options, is there interest involved?
There's no interest. There is an insurance premium on the one where it's paid off. And so, it's not $1 for $1. That option is there, $1 for $1. But the insurance premium, and that's based on your age, your health, and how long you're paying this off for. And so there's these fancy guys in the insurance agencies, our insurance company, I think their names are actuators, and they determine how long they think you think they think you're going to live. And so then that that premium is based on whatever they say.
And they deal directly with you. This is not something they do on the side.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. And so, being that it's a particular product that's offered, through that the Texas Department of Insurance allows, it's strictly only prepaid funerals. That's what we do. And so it's not like your big, large insurance companies where you go out there. Now, I do see some of those companies that do like, burial insurance, and they'll put like a $10,000. But the issue is that doesn't freeze the cost. And so right now we're talking about $6,500 being the average funeral. Well, if you live another 15, 20 years, $10,000 may not cover it, And so if you prepay your funeral at the funeral home and you have it pre-planned all the way through, you can live as long as you want to live, and it's covered, Like I said, the flip side is the funeral home does get some sort of interest off of that. So we're not here rooting for you to pass away. We want you to live as long as you can so we can get more interest on that as well.
You brought up an interesting point. So, okay, if I buy a pre-needs policy and I don't tell my family members about it and they just go and pay for your services, what happens to my pre-needs policy?
Well, a couple of things. So number one, either they find it somewhere when they're digging through your paperwork and come back and we get the money refunded for you. Or number two, every year when the state of Texas releases that little form in the newspaper that has all the names of people that have unclaimed money, in about 15, 20 years after they realize you've passed away and no one claimed that money, it ends up on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Which is where you don't want it to end up. The whole idea of pre-planning, whether that be with me, whether that be with you, is to make sure that our money's working for us, it's going the right place. And so nobody wants to see their money go to the government, and so that's why it's so important to have that conversation.
Okay. Yeah.
Have you seen a situation where, for whatever reason, I did pre-planning and I've decided to transfer that to somebody else?
Yeah.
That I think might need it?
Yeah, no, you can't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's an insurance policy. Remember that.
Gotcha.
So it's on you. And so that's your life. And you could cancel it. You lose a little money. Most insurance companies take a little premium. But that's pretty rare that someone would do that because you're planning for yourself.
Right.
And the cemetery side of things, that's a little bit different. Those are property laws. And so you own that. And if you want to use it for someone else, you can. Once again, then you're out of property. You gave it to someone else, and so a lot of times it's beneficial to just start.
But I can pay the premium on someone else's?
Yes, you can.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as they're aware of it. They have to sign off. You can't just go plan someone's funeral and they not know about it, but as long as they're aware of it.
A little weird.
Yeah, it might be a little weird, and they may be looking
It was
over
just
there.
a question.
Maybe looking over, yeah. Hey, if he's trying to plan, he called me last week. But look over your shoulder a little bit. Yeah,
You gotta, if you're running a business, you got to know the health status of your business partner.
Yeah. Make sure. And
We share each other's.
yeah, how's he doing?
Well, he's a ultra marathon runner, so he should be worried about me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I walked last week.
You're the ultra not marathon runner? Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. But yeah, I was driving down a 2 mile line the other day there in Mission. I see this guy running. I'm like, well, what's he doing, man? He's exercising instead of, you're supposed to be there working my money somewhere, not having fun. But anyway, he looks intense when he runs, man.
That's the thing. You said.
I was going to say fun. Yeah. Where's the fun?
He's not the same guy running. He's like serious and he's intense. And anyway.
Yeah. Must have been a good podcast.
That's what you're listening to, huh?
You mentioned will earlier. I've seen some wills that state these are my wishes, like burial or cremation or whatever. Can you walk us through that process?
In my world, there's no process there. So let's talk a little bit about the will process. Most time those wills aren't read till weeks later. Wills are meant for a legal document that go through a legal proceeding. And so a lot of times that's going to end up in a probate court somewhere. And so that's not read oftentimes for many, many weeks. And I know people that, when someone passes away, we just don't think about that. We've got a job to do. We got to get a funeral over. We got to get so-and-so in town. We got to get Johnny, out of college for the weekend. There's so many things that has to happen, and the wills just aren't even thought of. And so that's a big issue, is that you can put stuff in your will along the lines with your funeral plan, and I agree with that, and I think that's a great idea. However, that's not where it has to stop. If that communication never made it to your beneficiaries, to your family, if they don't know where to go, likely no one's going to see that will for several weeks, if not a few months. I think right now, Texas is averaging 9 months at probate court. And so, if that's where you're at, is 9 months at probate court, the funeral's been long gone. We had that funeral 9 months ago, possibly 10 months ago, before you even, that will was even looked at.
to that point, I'm not sure if we've mentioned this. When is payment due?
At the time of service. Yeah, one of the issues is that, a lot of people always call me and say, "Hey, how long do we have to pay?" We're not regulated by Department of Banking. There's nothing to repossess, I mean, you don't pay. I can't go to the cemetery and dig the casket back up and say, "Well, that's my casket." And so being that there's nothing to repossess, the Department of Banking, is very strict on the way they do lending. So we don't do any lending, so you do have to pay up front at the time of service. I typically tell people before we go to the cemetery, I need to be paid. And even then, that's a little bit stressful on people because now they're sitting here having a viewing of their loved one, and they're still trying to come up with money. Whether that mean, working on some sort of credit application online, talking to friends that are coming in, and so it's really uncomfortable. And to be quite frank, it's uncomfortable for the funeral professional. It's uncomfortable for me to walk in there and say, "Hey, I know Dad's in the casket here, but you haven't paid." And, a lot of times you can look at any funeral home across the country and look at their Google reviews. And that's one of the things that comes up in the Google reviews is like, they wanted me to pay while I was in. Well, it's not necessarily that we wanted you to pay. It's that A, you have to pay, and B, we don't have a better time to come to you because it wasn't pre-planned. It wasn't prepared for that.
Yeah. So what do some people do if they don't have a pre-needs? It takes 9 months to probate an estate. You need payment right away. So other than a GoFundMe page, what are some useful strategies?
Call everybody you know. Yeah, and y'all are no strangers. You've been around people your whole lives. You're no stranger to it. People call and say, "Hey, I need help. I need help." And one of the things that I always say, James, is that it's not a sin to be poor. We're not talking people that just don't have it. That's a different scenario. And there is some avenues for help out there. The counties will help, and and we certainly at the funeral home will help. That's not what I'm talking about. Because there's plenty of people that have plenty of money in the bank. And that's one of the issues. Kids will come in and say, "Hey, Dad has a portfolio. It's huge. He's got millions. There's lots of zeros at the end." Okay, well, let's pay for the funeral. We don't have any money to pay for the funeral. It's all tied up. And that you start thinking about that. How sad is that?
Can you expand on that? What do they mean? What do they mean by it's tied up?
Okay,
it's probably better coming from you than the greedy financial professionals.
Why'd you point it?
You caught that. I'm glad you caught that. It wasn't a Freudian slip.
So you start thinking about tell me. Yeah, I'm gonna flip it on you.
This is a hypothetical.
No, but let's talk for.
I need a death certificate.
Okay, you need a death certificate. Now the funeral director, he's trying to get it. The doctor's got to sign it. It's got to go to Austin to get filed, and then it gets mailed back. Snail mail, copied back to us. So
who's doing the death? Who's
funeral director?
Funeral director.
Right.
Okay.
And so by law, by law, the doctor has 10 days to get that signed and back to us.
Yeah.
So already, right off from time of death, 10 days. Then it's got to go to Austin. Then it's got to be certified and sent back. Okay, so already we're talking, it's not uncommon this day and age to see 6 weeks. So when my kids came to you and we're having a funeral in 3 days, what did you tell them? You said, "I need a death certificate." Now they can't get one for 6 weeks. Now what do you tell them?
I'm sorry.
Well, and so that's the answer. And so that's what people are coming to me and they'll say to me is that Dad has plenty of money. Okay, but that doesn't help us today. And so then now they're looking at credit cards and you hate to admit it, but we live in a day and age, most of those credit cards in our wallets are maxed out. A lot of people live off maxed out credit cards. And so then they don't have the money for that. And, when we start talking about cemetery property, we start talking about funerals, you're talking about a significant amount of credit card debt that they're having to figure out how do we get this done. Mm-hmm. And so it's a scary thing. That's why it's so important to plan. So the option, there is no option. It has to be pre-planned. Otherwise, mom and dad need to have some money that's liquid for someone. And I do see it occasionally where people have plenty of money in the bank account. They make sure that their kids are a signer on there. And so, the check has their name on it and they can write it out of that account. That's fine. It works just fine like that. But if that's not what you're doing, you're setting your kids up for some sort of very painful time at your death. And the truth is, it's already painful. Let them grieve, but when they can't grieve, now they're having to come back and say, "All right, we got to work on the business end of this."
Have you found families asking to delay the funeral until they can get payment?
Yeah, and that happens. And there's been times where we've actually had to cancel the funeral. It's already scheduled. It's already hit the obituary. It's already out there. And then, they'll say, I can't come up with the money. And, once again, as a funeral home, we don't have any recourse. There's nothing I can do other than say, when do you think you'll have the money? Well, it's, I talked to the people that have my 401k and they said they can cut me a check and it'll be here in a week and a half or in my bank account in a week. Okay, well, then we'll just have to delay until then. And they're understanding of it, but it's sure not comfortable. And it's not a comfortable conversation for them, and it's certainly not a comfortable conversation for us either. And so and so I think that the main thing I'm trying to get across is pre-plan. Whether that be with a funeral home, whether that means come and talk to one of the Jameses, whatever that is. That Jameses? Is that a word?
It is.
James is?
Yes.
Yeah. We've had to Google this before.
It's come up several times.
Okay, so it's James.
We still don't know.
James I. It's not James I. It's James is.
It's James's.
I like
James's,
that, James.
okay.
I never thought of that.
Wait, so whether you talk to me or one of the James I's, anyway, long
Rolls
story.
right off the tongue.
It's all English.
Yeah. So whether you talk to me or them, it's so important to make sure that the plan is laid out. And that someone knows about the plan. And I think that's the biggest thing. People always talk about the pandemic and, the pandemic. But the truth is, the pandemic that we have in America is lack of being prepared also. I mean, and it's not just the Valley. We like to beat up on the Valley because we're here and that's what we're watching. But every funeral director you talk to all over the country is saying the same thing, that nobody's prepared. And, honestly, we all know that there's going to come a day that we're going to pass away. I mean, it's going to happen one day.
Okay. Well, as a fan of the show, you know that sometimes I like to use this time for confession. And I'm sure
everything you say stays here. We're not going to tell anybody.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I don't know that I've ever talked to somebody. We've talked about planning, but not to the level of, okay, what are you going to do with your house? You need to update it, kind of like you were saying, or your mom is up north. You're gonna have to fly over there. You're gonna have to take some time off. You have a dog. You're gonna have to find a sitter. So what's all that gonna cost? How are we gonna take care of that? So how do you have that conversation? What's a good dollar amount?
Well, and funerals, obviously, come into the funeral home, pick out your casket. That's the biggest thing on the price. Funerals, that's one thing. But you're talking about end of life expenses. And so as you look at end of life expenses, we're all different. If I have a 1,500 square foot house and you're living in your mansion because he has my money that he's investing, since you're living in your mansion, it's going to cost more for you to update that house and get it ready to sell. If all your family lives here and, you don't have anyone in Cambodia like I do, well, it's a little less. And so I think that, you have to kind of come up with an idea of what is it that we need. And, real honestly, there's people that say, if mom's car gets repossessed, it's under her social security number. But there's other people that say, man, she's got 4 payments left. I don't want to lose this car over 4 payments. Well, then that's a scenario you need to plan for, is that we've got to put some money aside to make sure that we can take care of all of these end of life expenses. And once again, I'll say it since it's my saying, the truth is that it is expensive to die. It's just, you can't just die and not be ready for it. It's expensive. And the more that you can set aside, the more you can have liquid ready to go, sure helps your family. And life insurance, general life insurance, not pre-need life insurance, it has its place too. There's oftentimes, like I have a term policy that covers if I pass away, my kids don't have to worry about paying for my house. But if I outlive that term, that's gone. So I have to be working on the side with you to make sure that I do have some money set aside for my kids.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about telling people your plans. What does that look like? Everything from like login information to, hey, I got some gold buried in the back.
Yeah. And if you tell James and I where you buried that gold, I promise you it's our secret. We're not going to tell anyone.
Tell you what, I have Bitcoin buried in the backyard.
It's locked in my wall.
If I could wink, I'd be winking at you right now.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And there's so many things out there now that I see that are preparing people for some sort of boxes. And you can see those commercially where you can prepare and put all those, for instance, my kids are in town right now, as a matter of fact. And so I just gave them my safe code and my, because I was telling my wife, I said, we put everything in our safe to safeguard it. What happens if we pass away, driving to work one day? Well, then our kids, they have to get a stick of dynamite. How does this work? I don't, and so all those things are so important. And now one thing, I bought that term life insurance when I purchased my new house I was telling you about. And so, now you don't get these papers in the mail anymore. It used to be you'd get these policies, the kids could flip through the policies. Well, now everything's digital. And so I don't have a policy sitting there when they open the safe and say, oh, here's Dad's life insurance policy. If I don't tell them about it, it just disappears. And so that's why it's just so important.
Yeah. So what are some real world practical things that people do to make sure that doesn't happen to them?
Well, number one is you got to have communications with your family. So often, people don't want to have these communications with their kids. They don't want, because they're a little bit private. And the older they get, they feel like they're losing they feel like they're losing everything in life. Things are getting taken away from them, their driver's license. So they want to hold on to what they can. But it's so important to have conversations and say, look, these are my passwords. This is where my bank accounts are. These are my investments. Even if it's, right, and putting in an envelope that says open at the time of my death, something to that effect. We had someone yesterday that was very similar. He was very private. And then they bring in this envelope to the funeral home. They said, hey, we just don't know what to do with it. And so we said, we opened it right there, and it had everything from his funeral directives to the titles of the cars to everything was right there inside that envelope. One of the things that there's a trailer park that I guess it's more of a winter Texan park, which I really thought was a cool idea, is that they would make, whenever someone moved into the park, they would have to tape an envelope under their table, just similar to the table here, with all their information in there. So that way, if they passed away and someone in the park finds them, but their kids don't live here, well, here's all the information. I always think that's a good idea also for just anybody. If I pass away, look under my table and it's out of sight, out of mind. No one's ever messing with it. And all my funeral plans, where, who to go talk to, to go talk to James. He's going to guide you through, our investments. And so that's so important. But at the end of the day, like you said, you got to get passwords into these bank accounts. And I think that you hit the nail on the head when you talked about payable on death. That is so important, whether that be an investment account, whether that be your bank account, anything that you can put a payable on death on, that sure helps, because even though it takes a few weeks, you're not having to go through the whole probate process. You come in with that death certificate, that becomes available to you.
Yeah. Since you mentioned the probate process, can you talk a little bit about potentially contested wills? Like, have you ever seen that situation, and how does that impact you, if at all?
Real honestly, it doesn't impact me because that's done well after the funeral. And quite frankly, I wouldn't be able to speak on that. That's a different podcast for an attorney. That's what they do. But just real briefly, so often you'll see people that are fighting over everything. Well, will prevents most of that. And, hopefully it's not going to be contested to the point that it changes, your desires. But one thing I will say oftentimes, and it's so sad, but it seems like if you have nothing to argue over, everybody argues. And if you got lots of assets, it seems like no one argues. I don't know what the deal is there, but anyway.
You mentioned,
that being said, my kids are going to argue. I got nothing to leave them. So.
Yet.
No, just making sure, because you mentioned the life insurance, and then there's pre-needs policies.
Right.
With life insurance, it sounds like there's a way, because a lot of people would say, I have life insurance, I'm covered.
Okay.
But I'm guessing that's not
so
not liquid.
That can be used. Typically, there's a fee for that, for life insurance, to follow the process and all that. So what the process is, that once you hand me your life insurance, now I'm going to call, find out who the beneficiary is. Now, here's one of the most important things I'm going to say. Call today, find out who your beneficiary is on absolutely everything. And let me tell you why. Number one, I've had situations where someone's been divorced, they've been remarried, they have 14 kids with a new wife that they've been with for 40 years. They pull out this old life insurance policy and they never change the beneficiary, and it's the ex-wife's name.
Is that good or bad?
That's really bad.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
because now the ex-wife gets all the money, and the new wife has to figure out how to pay for the funeral.
Gotcha.
And depending on how that relationship is, my goodness,
We've seen it.
Yeah. We put up this cage in the office and it's UFC, I mean, it gets ugly because, you're talking money, and, the new spouse was under the impression that we had this life insurance policy, but no one ever bothered to check who the beneficiary is. And that's the same thing as when someone passes away. For instance, when my grandfather passed away, that was one of the most important things. We went to my grandmother and said, okay, your investments that you have, who's your beneficiary? Well, your grandpa was. Okay, that needs to be resolved, because now you're having to go through and get a death certificate for him, get a death certificate for her to prove all this. And so that's very important, to make sure that no matter where your money's at, whether that be life insurance, whether it be investments, that you know who your beneficiary is. And life changes, I'm 47 years old. I know I look 20. I'm sorry, James, to break that to you. But anyway, 47 years old, but I'm hoping not to pass away before I'm 80, And so the investments, though, I need to come to you every once in a while and say, let's go over everything to make sure that all that information's the same. On the same token, I just moved to a new house, and one of the first phone calls I made was to James and said, hey, I need to update my address. I mean, it's that simple. And I think, you can pretty much change a beneficiary with one form, can't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's easy to do. Just nobody likes to talk about their own demise. So yeah. But so going back to the life insurance, and so you can use that. It does not freeze the cost, and so that means that every year that you're living, you're losing less of what your family gets to keep of that life insurance policy. Okay. And then B, if there's an issue with the beneficiary, if it's less than 2 years old in the state of Texas, every life insurance has to be 2 years old to be non-contestable. And so what that means is that when you buy a life insurance policy, they ask you some questions. They say, James, do you have diabetes? And you say, no. Do you have cancer? No. They go through this whole health questionnaire. Now, in the first 2 years, the life insurance company has the right to call your doctor and say, hey, did James have diabetes? If he says no, well, you're in good shape. They're going to pay you. But this is a lengthy process. And so if he says, well, no, James had diabetes for the last 40 years and he just didn't want to tell you that, well, they have the right to deny that policy. After 2 years, 24 months and 1 day, they have to pay. They don't have the right to do the contestability. So as a funeral home, and just about any funeral home I know, if your policy is in that contestability period, we're not going to take it. We can't take it because it's going to be months of them calling the doctor, asking for records. And so their life insurance, very good, but there's some drawbacks to it too.
Sorry for the slow learners like myself. What do you mean that you'll take it?
We'll take it as payment. Right. So let's just talk once again, round number. So you have a $10,000 life insurance policy. There's a $5,000 funeral. And so we will take a assignment on that $10,000 or of the $5,000. So we would get our $5,000 from the life insurance policy, and then your beneficiary would get the balance, which would be $5,000 in that scenario.
Okay.
Yeah. But it doesn't freeze the cost. So say you bought a $10,000 policy today, and you're anticipating a $5,000 funeral, but you live 20 years. Well, it didn't freeze the cost. You may or may not have enough with that $10,000. Now, say you buy that $10,000 policy today, and you pass away in 18 months. Well, now it becomes contestable. And so the insurance company can contest it and say, well, we may or may not pay this. No funeral home is going to take that gamble.
So when you say assign, you mean when you first purchase the policy?
No. At the time of death, once we start the claim process, then we're going to assign a certain portion of that over to the funeral home.
And then is the beneficiary the one signing off?
That is correct.
That they're okay? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that is correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you can only do that with life insurance policies. You can't do that with a POD or TOD.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
For the audience.
Yeah. Say what POD and TOD is for the audience.
Payable on death and transfer on death.
Yeah. And so you can't do that because you have to have that death certificate. And so
Don't you need death certificate for?
Right. Most funeral homes will use a fast funding company. We use a fast funding company. And so they'll wait for their money. While we're waiting on the death certificate, they'll wait for their money, but they'll fund the funeral home immediately.
Wow.
Yeah. And you see that in a lot of industries. I think talking to someone that has a truck brokerage the other day, and I think they're even doing like fast funding on, getting funded quickly.
Okay. I think we should wrap up with, because you teased it so much that I think you said we were going to grow the money more than the pre-needs policy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I didn't, not my words, his words.
No. And so let's go there.
Okay. Let's do it.
So the purpose of the prepaid funeral is that you're hoping your money beats inflation because you're stopping the inflation because you're freezing the cost. It never goes up on you. And so most financial guys, they're a bit anti-prepaid funeral because they say, look, we can beat inflation all day, every day. All you got to do is just give us your money and we're going to give you more than inflation.
That's because they're using the inflation of the previous 10 years, not the inflation of the 80s.
Well, and so, but that's...
I thought you were going to say of the 2030s.
I was like, whoa.
Picture inflation.
No.
But that's y'all's department, So answer the question then. Do you think you can beat inflation just about any day of the week?
Yeah, you mean on Sundays.
Okay. Yeah. So y'all can beat inflation.
Yeah.
And so your proper advice to somebody would be, why put your money into something that's just you're keeping up with inflation versus invest your money here, you're going to make more than inflation. And so that is the right way, but the problem with it is you still have to have enough liquid that you can pay for your funeral. And if you don't have enough liquid, then this doesn't matter at all. And so financial guys all the time, that's their idea is that, they're going to say, we can beat the inflation. Don't prepay your funeral. But at the same time, you have to share the flip side of that. There has to be some liquid money available. So explain to me, maybe you guys can help me because this is outside. So what would be some examples of liquid money? And so obviously money in the bank account, but are there other avenues that people would have, there are other products that they could have that would make money that's liquid available to their family quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail right on the head where, adding a signer. I see that a lot.
Okay.
I see them just gifting cash. The only problem with that.
No one has ever done that to me. Yeah, I'm waiting for someone to gift me cash. You know what? We could do it right here on TV. If you want to gift me some cash.
Yeah, I think $19,000 is the annual limit now.
I don't carry cash.
I'm okay with $19,000 for the record. You don't carry the cash, huh?
But dying is expensive.
Yeah, we just went over this.
Okay. The only issue with that is, first, not knowing anybody that's going to give you cash.
Right.
But if you did know somebody that's going to give you cash, there's no guarantee that person's going to use it for.
Right.
Yeah, for that.
Yeah.
Can you think of any other ways to do it?
Some clients have said we're joint accounts.
Okay.
Yeah. But that has to go through. That needs a death certificate too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like either you have money in your bank account and they're a signer on it, or like you say, through their financial avenues or through their investments, they have a signer on there as well.
Yeah.
And do you see people struggling to put an extra signer on there a lot of times? Do you see people saying, I'm not comfortable with that? Or you see most people kind of comfortable with one of their children being a signer?
I've seen both.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It depends on the familial dynamic, right?
Yeah, I can see that. And so, there's so many, we could have a whole other podcast just talking about, all these family dynamics and how this is going to work out. But yeah, it's a tough decision. And so that's why it's so important for people to go see you, to come see me, to make an appointment at the cemetery if that's what they so choose, and start doing that. I tell people all the time, they come see me and say, come see you in a week. No, you're not. Nobody wants to come see their funeral director. And, I guarantee you, James, he's not going to give his wife a funeral plan on Valentine's Day and say, babe, I bought you a funeral plan. Happy Valentine's Day. It's just not one of those products, but it's so important.
This James would do that. I know you wanted flowers and a watch, but I got you my prepaid finance.
I got you a funeral plan. I'm
a planner, baby.
For the benefit of the audience, we talk about either prepaid or pre-need versus investing. I think it's kind of like the self-insure or insurance conversation.
I've never thought of it that way, but that's true.
Yeah. And so usually what we tell people when trying to decide whether you're going to self-insure or not is, okay, so yes, you might be able to do better than inflation with your investments. You just might not have that time because you don't ever know when that time's going to come.
Yeah. Well, I think I want to self-insure if I'm never going to get sick or anything like that.
Right.
I'm good with that.
Yeah. Tell me your life expectancy, and then
that's right. Then we'll talk about this conversation. But that's a great point. Is that there's so many ways of doing it, and so there's no cookie cutter way for anybody, and so it's very difficult. We have to make sure people have to make sure they're well informed and they make the decision that's best for them and their family. So often we make decisions what's best for me, but that may not be what's best for those left behind.
Yeah, that was very informative.
Thank you.
Yeah,
some of it was true. I'm just messing with you.
Now the taxes part of it, right?
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things so it's interesting because people always ask me like, what's the dollar amount? What's it? But there are no taxes on funerals in Texas, and so you don't have to pay sales tax on funerals in Texas. So I guess we probably shouldn't say that on the air because legislators might hear that, and who knows where that goes. But anyway,
especially on this podcast,
it
might go viral.
Go viral. There's so many.
This is the one.
this one right here.
Well, this has been fun, guys. I've been grateful.
No, thank you,
man.
Thanks, Tim. We appreciate it.
This has been a lot of fun.
That was very informative and very helpful.
Well, thank you, and I'm happy to come back on. And also if some of the viewers have some questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer those questions. We can even do something if you so choose. We could even do a seminar one day where some of your clients want to hear some of that. I'll be happy to sit down. We could do something like that. But that'd be a lot of fun.
Since you mentioned that website, you have a website?
I do. Yeah, rickbrownffh.com.
rickbrownffh.com.
So it's Rick Brown Family Funeral Home, Rick Brown FFH. And by the way, so my dad was Rick. He's passed away, but his name, he spelled it R-I-C. And so my mom is Kathy, so she spells hers with a K. So it's always Rick without the K, Kathy with the K. So when you put Rick Brown, you can't put the K, just R-I-C, brownffh.com. But anyway.
Well, there you go.
Easy enough.
Well, it seems easy enough, but I tell that story about 14 times a day so people can remember it. So
It's the first time we heard it. So.
there you go, man. Easy enough. There you got it.
Well, we appreciate it, Tim.
Well, thank you. Appreciate
Thank
you
you.
guys.
And we appreciate y'all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Our 2 Cents on Your Dollar, proudly presented by Strategic Insights. If today's conversation brought you clarity, please pass it along, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and check the description below to learn more about us. Until next time, stay informed, stay invested, and stay strategic.